Story 1. The elevator only stops for certain people. I moved into the building because it was cheap. That's really the whole story. No dramatic backstory, no tale of desperation. It was just a good deal in a city where rent kept climbing and apartments kept shrinking. The building was old, but you could tell it was well maintained. 12 floors, one single elevator, and long, narrow hallways that always smelled faintly of cleaning solution, with a strange, metallic scent underneath it all. The lobby was always quiet, always dim. There was a security desk, but it was never staffed. I figured the guard must work the late shift. It wasn't until much later that I learned there had never been a guard at all. For the first few weeks, the elevator behaved exactly as you'd expect an old elevator to. It was slow, but it was functional. It would groan as it moved between floors, pause a little longer than necessary, and every now and then it would shudder, like it was second-guessing its own existence. But it always got me where I needed to go, till one night it didn't. I got in and pressed the button for my floor, number 7. The doors closed, and the elevator started to go down, not up. Then, it just stopped. The display panel didn't show a number. It was just a blank dash. No chime, no sound at all. The doors stayed shut. I felt this weird pressure in my ears, like a sudden drop in altitude on a plane. And then, just as quietly as it had stopped, it started moving again, resuming its climb. The doors opened on the 7th floor, as if nothing strange had happened. I just shook my head and told myself it was a glitch. Old building, old wiring. It happens. A few days after that, I noticed something else. Something odd about the control panel. The buttons for the floors skipped a number. Now there was no 13th floor, which is pretty common and not weird at all. But there was also no 9th floor. The panel went straight from 8 to 10. I got curious, so I took the stairs one day to check. Sure enough, in the stairwell, there was no door marked with a 9. The next time I saw the building manager, I decided to ask him about it. He gave me a little frown, which quickly turned into a dismissive smile. Old buildings, he said, with a wave of his hand. Lots of renovations over the years. The answer felt too simple. It didn't explain why the elevator would sometimes pause just for a moment. Right at the point where the 9th floor should have been, that's when I started to see the patterns. There were certain tenants who always, and I mean always, used the elevator. They'd never take the stairs, not even to go down one floor to the lobby. Then there was another group who avoided the elevator like it was a death. They would huff and puff their way up and down the stairwell, no matter how many flights they had to climb. The strangest part was, these two groups of people never seemed to cross paths. It was like they existed on different schedules, in different worlds, as if the building itself had quietly sorted them into separate categories. I met her on a Tuesday night. She looked to be in her mid-30s, wearing a dark coat with eyes that just looked. We rode the elevator together in complete silence. She pressed the button for 12. I'd pressed for 7. As we moved up, the elevator slowed between floors, just like it had before. It stopped. The display went blank. But this time, the door slid open. We weren't on a numbered floor. We were looking at a hallway I'd never seen before. The lighting was dimmer, the carpet was a darker shade of red, and the walls seemed narrower, more constricting. Without a word, the woman stepped out into it. I almost called out to her to tell her this wasn't the 12th floor. But before I could get a word out, the doors slid shut. The elevator resumed its climb. When the doors opened on my floor, my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't see her again. The next day, I checked the tenant directory in the lobby. Her name was gone from apartment 12A. A few days later, I saw my neighbor Paul in the hall. I asked him if he'd seen the woman from 12A recently. He just stared at me, his expression blank. "Which one?" he asked. "There was only one woman living there," I said, confused. Paul just shook his head slowly. "And she wasn't meant to stay," he said, and that was it. He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there. That was the end of that conversation. About a week went by. I was alone in the elevator, heading up to the 7th floor again. And just like before, it stopped between floors. But this time when the doors opened, they opened wider. The strange hallway outside seemed closer, clearer. I could see the details more vividly. The stale air from it drifted into the elevator car, smelling of old paper and rooms that hadn't been aired out in decades. I felt this pull. It's not a physical force, but a conceptual one, like an unspoken invitation. I stood my ground, my feet planted. After a long moment, the doors closed and the elevator continued on its way. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong, so I went to the city records office. I spent hours digging through old files until I found them. The original blueprints for the building. It wasn't originally designed as residential apartments. The plans showed it was built as transitional housing, a place for temporary stays, short-term occupancy with a high rate of turnover. And deep within the schematics, I found them. The blueprints included extra floors, unlabeled spaces, quietly removed from all the later public records. I started observing the other tenants more closely, especially the ones who had been here for a while. The people who stayed for more than a few years. They changed. They became quieter, their movements more routine, almost robotic. They were less reactive to things around them. They always rode the elevator at the exact same times every day. And I noticed they never pressed the buttons anymore. They'd just step inside and wait. The elevator already knew where they were going. One night, riding up alone, I realized the elevator wasn't just moving. It was communicating. It didn't use words, it used timing. The doors closed more slowly, with a sense of purpose. Stops felt deliberate, not like a malfunction. When it would pause between floors now, I felt like I was being evaluated, measured, categorized. And the hallway outside, it looked a little more familiar each time. It was as if the building was learning how to recreate a space I might want to step into. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. The next time it happened, I did it. I stepped out. Just 1 foot onto the carpet of the strange hallway, and the hallway responded. The dim lights brightened slightly. The stale air felt a little warmer. The elevator doors stayed open, waiting. A shiver went down my spine, and I quickly pulled my foot back inside the car. The lights in the hall dimmed again, as if in disappointment. I had to know more. I cornered the building manager again. This time, he didn't bother with a fake smile or a story about renovations. His face was serious. "The building manages its own occupancy," he said quietly. I asked him what that meant. "To prevent stagnation," was his cryptic reply. "And the people who disappear are pressed." "They don't disappear," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "They transition." It all clicked into place. The elevator wasn't malfunctioning. It was sorting. It was separating the tenants who were still moving forward in their lives from those who had settled too comfortably, who had become stagnant. Those with momentum were allowed to stay. Those without were repurposed. The unlisted floors weren't empty spaces. They were full. One evening, I was so lost in thought I walked into the elevator and completely forgot to press a button. It didn't matter. The doors closed, and it began to move anyway. It stopped. The doors opened onto the in-between floor. The hallway was fully lit now, perfectly clear and complete. And I recognized the layout. It was a simplified, cleaner version of my own apartment. The longer I lived there, the more often the elevator would stop for me. Sometimes it would happen even when other people were inside with me. They'd never noticed. They just stared straight ahead at the doors, completely unaware that we had stopped, or that a phantom doorway had opened right beside them. It was as if, for them, nothing had happened at all. I learned that once someone finally steps out onto one of those unlisted floors, their apartment empties overnight. It's not abandoned, it's reclaimed. Their belongings are gone, their names are scraped from the directory, and their absence is just normalized. No one ever speaks of them again. That was it. I had to leave. I started packing boxes. I booked movers. I gave my notice. But the building had other plans. The elevator refused to go to the lobby. Every time I got in, it would stop between floors. The hallway outside looked almost welcoming now, patient, waiting for me. The building manager showed up at my door on my supposed move-out day. "You've been here long enough," he said, not as a question. "Too long?" I asked. He nodded. "You're stable," he said. "Predictable, efficient." I asked him what would happen if I tried to leave. He gave me a thin, tight-lipped smile. "The building would prefer you not to." I finally understood what the in-between floor was for. It isn't a punishment. It isn't a form of death. It's storage. It's a place for people who've stopped changing, who no longer disrupt the patterns of the building. A place for people who fit in too well. Tonight, the elevator doesn't pause anymore. When I step inside, it goes directly to the unlisted floor. The doors open, the hallway waits, and I don't feel afraid. I just feel sorted. I'm telling you all this because you might live in a building like mine. So if your elevator ever pauses where it shouldn't, if a button on the panel suddenly disappears, or if a neighbor steps out of the elevator and is never mentioned again, pay attention. Buildings remember. Some of them decide when you've stayed long enough. Thanks for listening, and if you like scary stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Story 2. Everyone on my street knows what time I leave. I moved to Hawthorne Lane because it looked ordinary. That was the selling point. Straight residential street with identical sidewalks, trimmed lawns, evenly spaced trees, and houses that all followed the same architectural rhythm to stories. Sloped roofs, front porches just wide enough to sit but not linger. Nothing stood out. Nothing demanded attention. After years of living in loud apartments in chaotic neighborhoods, I wanted something predictable. Hawthorne Lane delivered that, little too well. The first morning I left for work, I waved at my neighbor. He was already outside, standing near his driveway, coffee in hand. He smiled and nodded. Nothing unusual. The second morning, he was there again. Same spot, same posture, same time. I told myself it was just a coincidence. By the end of the week, I realized it wasn't just him. Every single house had someone outside when I left. They weren't doing anything specific. They were just present. It wasn't the watching that bothered me. It was the precision. I left at exactly 7:42 a.m. that week. Not 7:40, not 7:45. Exactly 7:42. And every morning, without fail, someone from each house stepped onto their porch or driveway just moments before I opened my front door. It was as if they were preparing, as if they already knew my every move. The following Monday, I decided to test the pattern. I left 5 minutes early. The street was empty. No one outside. No movement. Not a single sign of life. I stepped onto the sidewalk, and immediately doors opened. Porch lights flicked on. People appeared quietly, efficiently taking their places like performers hitting their marks on a stage. My stomach tightened. They hadn't been waiting. They'd been responding to me. That afternoon, I stopped to talk to Mrs. Keller from 2 houses down. "Do you always come out in the mornings?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She tilted her head, a strange little smile on her face. "Of course," she said. "We wouldn't want to miss me." Before I could ask what she meant, she just smiled warmly and went back inside, leaving me standing there, more confused than ever. Over the next few weeks, I noticed other patterns. The garbage bins were only rolled out after I passed. Dogs started barking exactly when I reached the third house on the left. Never before, never after. Car engines didn't start until I was halfway down the block. It was as if my movement activated the entire street, as if I was the signal that started their day. One Friday, I stayed home sick. 7:42 came and went. I watched through the blinds. No one came outside. No doors opened. Street remained completely still, frozen in time. Then, at 8:10, someone knocked on my door. I didn't answer. At 8:12, someone else knocked. Softer this time, almost concerned. At 8:15, the knocking stopped. Heard doors opening, footsteps, people gathering outside, just waiting. That afternoon, I found a note in my mailbox. It was on plain paper with neat, precise handwriting. It read, "Please keep to the schedule." It helps everyone. There was no signature. No explanation. I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted my neighbor directly that evening. "Why does everyone watch me leave?" I asked, my voice shaking a little. He sighed, a tired, resigned look on his face. "Because you're the marker," he said. "The what?" "The reference point," he explained. "Without you, the timing gets messy." "What timing?" I demanded. He just glanced down the street. All of it. So I started digging. I researched Hawthorne Lane's history. Old records, property transfers, zoning changes. The street had been rebuilt multiple times, always with the same layout, always the same number of houses, and always after some kind of major disruption. Fires, flooding, economic collapse. The street survived by adapting, by stabilizing, by anchoring itself to something. "People come and go," Mrs. Keller finally admitted to me one day. "But not everyone stays." "What happens to them?" I asked. "They drift," she said, her voice low. "The street doesn't like drift." "And me?" I asked, my heart pounding. She smiled gently. You keep us aligned. One morning, I tripped on the sidewalk. Just for a second, barely enough to stumble. The street reacted instantly. Dogs barked. Car alarms chirped. Porch lights flickered on and off. I even heard someone gasp. The air itself felt like it had been corrected. When I stood up, I looked at my watch. It read 7:42 again. But I was sure it had been 7:44 just before I fell. Time had slipped backward. I started to understand why I felt so tired all the time. Maintaining a perfect schedule takes effort. I just hadn't realized I was the one doing all the work. Each day, leaving the house felt heavier, like pushing against something invisible, like trying to resist gravity. The street was pulling consistency out of me, using me as its reference point to hold itself together. There was one house on the street that was always dark. Lights off, curtains drawn, no one ever outside. I asked about it once. That was the previous marker, someone said quietly. What happened to them? They left early, Mrs. Keller replied, and that was all anyone would say. The house stayed dark, uninhabited, waiting. Then, I overslept one morning. I ran out the door at 8:03. The street felt completely wrong. People were outside, but they were tense, misaligned. Some stood too close to the curb. Others were pacing back and forth. The dogs were barking out of sync. The air felt stretched, unstable. That night, someone came to my door again. But this time, it was the whole street. We need consistency, they told me, their faces serious. We need reliability. I'm just a person, I pleaded. Mrs. Keller shook her head slowly. You're more than that to us now. I had to get out. I listed my house. I packed boxes. I scheduled movers. On the morning they were supposed to arrive, no truck came. Wow. When I called the company, they had no record of my booking at all. When I tried to drive away myself, my car wouldn't start. And then at exactly 7:42, the engine turned over on its own. The entire street seemed to let out a collective sigh of relief. Life became easier when I complied. Traffic lights stayed green for me. My meetings always ended early. Everything just flowed as long as I left at the same time every single day. Street rewarded stability, and it punished deviation. One night I saw a light in the dark house. A figure was standing at the window, watching me, waiting, ready. And I realized the truth. Markers aren't permanent, they're replaced. When they weaken, when they resist, when the street finds someone better suited, someone more precise. I'm telling you this now because lately I've been waking up earlier, without setting an alarm, exactly the same time every single morning. The street is adjusting. It's preparing for something new. And I think I know who's next. So pay attention. If your neighbors always seem to know your routine, if people appear the moment you leave your house, if the timing of your entire neighborhood seems to revolve around you, if staying consistent feels easier than changing, you might not just live on your street. You might be the one holding it all together. Thanks for listening, and if you like stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Story 3. The night shift knows when I'm still awake. I didn't take the night shift because I wanted to. I took it because it was quiet. The building I worked in was an administrative center for the city records. Permits, archived files, forgotten departments that existed more out of habit than necessity. During the day, it was a chaotic mess of noise and people. But at night, it was empty. Or so I thought.
Ow.
My shift started at 11 p.m. and ended at 7 o'clock a.m. The job was simple. All I had to do was sit at the front desk, monitor a bank of old cameras, log the building's temperatures every hour, and make one full walkthrough every 2 hours. It was simple. It was predictable. Back then, that was very important to me. I needed the quiet. I needed the routine. On my first night, the daytime supervisor, a man named Henderson, handed me the keys and a clipboard with a checklist. No one comes in after midnight, he said, his voice flat. That's fine, I replied. But then he hesitated, looking at me for a moment too long. If you see movement after midnight, he continued, his tone dropping slightly. Don't assume it's a person. I laughed, thinking it was some kind of hazing ritual, a joke for the new guy. Henderson didn't laugh. He just nodded once and left. I was alone. The building definitely changed at night. Not in a physical way, not at first. It was more conceptual. The hallways felt longer, stretching just a bit further than they should. Corners seemed to expect something. holding shadows that felt deeper than they had any right to be. Even the low hum of the fluorescent lights settled into a rhythm that felt intentional, like the slow, steady breathing of a sleeping giant. And then there was the temperature. At exactly 12:30 a.m. every single night, the building's temperature would drop by precisely 2 degrees. It didn't matter what season it was. It didn't matter if it was a sweltering summer night or a freezing winter one. The system logs confirmed it every time. 2-degree drop, punctual, unexplained. There were 16 cameras. It's all old, all grainy, all pointed at various hallways, stairwells, and entrances. But at night they didn't show the same version of the building I was walking through. Sometimes a solid wall on camera 3 would have a door in it. Sometimes the 4th floor hallway would extend into an impossible darkness. I'd see a light on in a room I had personally locked and checked just minutes before. After the 3rd night of frantically scribbling notes and reporting it, I stopped. I realized from Henderson's tired silence over the phone that he already knew. It was just part of the job. I found the 2nd rule by accident. It was taped to the inside of the main security desk drawer, handwritten on a yellowed piece of paper. The ink was faded, but the words were clear. If you are still awake after 3 a.m., do not sit down. There was no explanation, no signature, just that one bizarre rule. I laughed again, a little less confidently this time. I really shouldn't have, because 3 a.m. mattered. The building shifted at 3 o'clock. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was just enough. The air grew heavier, pressing down in a way that made my ears pop. The lights dimmed by a fraction, just enough to notice. And as the hum changed, pitch becoming lower, more resonant. It felt like the moment right before a question is asked. As if the building itself was leaning in, checking to see if you were paying attention. It happened on my 5th shift. I was bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that makes your thoughts feel like they're moving through mud. I glanced at the clock. It was 3:07 a.m. I forgot the rule, sat down in the squeaky office chair at the security desk. And instantly, the hum stopped. Complete dead silence. Every single camera feed froze at the exact same moment. Then one screen flickered and changed. It showed the security desk. It showed the back of my chair. It showed me. The camera was positioned somewhere behind me in the empty lobby. I didn't move a muscle. The image on the screen didn't move either. But something in the frame felt deeply wrong. Too close. Too aware. A shadow in the corner of the screen seemed to lean slightly forward. It wasn't casting a shadow. It was a shadow. Present. Alive. My heart hammered against my ribs. I slowly, deliberately stood up. The moment my feet were firmly on the floor, the feed snapped back to the empty hallway it was supposed to show. The low hum of the building returned as if nothing had happened. The rule made perfect sense after that. At 4 o'clock a.m., I had to do my rounds. The 3rd floor was always the worst. It was the record storage, just long, suffocating rows of metal shelves filled with forgotten files under a low ceiling. But that night, the shelves were closer together. I know they weren't. I'd measured the aisle widths with my own feet earlier that week out of sheer boredom. The space hadn't physically changed, but it felt intentional, as if the aisles were narrowing, trying to limit my movement to guide me. I started digging through old employee logs I found in a filing cabinet. The turnover rate was insane. Most night guards lasted 3 to 6 months, then quit. But a few names appeared multiple times. There would be gaps in their employment, then they'd come back. Returns. One name appeared consistently for decades, always the night shift. Always listed as a temporary contract. The logs showed he resigned again and again. And then he was rehired again and again. The 3rd rule appeared out of nowhere. One morning, as I was packing up, I glanced at my clipboard. A new sentence was there, in that same familiar, faded handwriting. Do not acknowledge the building if it acknowledges you. I didn't understand it, not yet. The building started to speak, but not with words. It used alignment. A row of lights would brighten in the hallway just as I stepped into it. A heavy office door would swing open just before my hand reached the knob. The ancient, creaky elevator would be waiting for me, doors open, on whatever floor I happened to be on, without me ever calling it. The building was responding to me. It was anticipating my needs. That was the acknowledgement, and I had to pretend I didn't notice. One morning, around 5:30, the exhaustion hit me like a physical blow. My eyes were burning, my thoughts were slowing to a crawl. I leaned against the cool plaster of the hallway wall just to steady myself, and the wall leaned back, not physically. It was an energetic pressure, a feeling of the building matching my weight, meeting my fatigue. I pushed myself off the wall, and the sensation lingered on my back for the rest of the shift. After 4 a.m., the cameras became liars. They'd show things out of sequence. Footage would run a few seconds ahead of reality, then jump a few seconds behind. I'd see myself on a monitor walking down a hallway I hadn't even reached yet. Then another would show me standing perfectly still in the lobby when I knew for a fact that I was moving through the second-floor offices. I stopped looking at any camera that showed a feed of myself. I volunteered for a double shift once. I needed the money. Henderson flatly refused. "Night ends when it ends," he said over the phone, his voice firm. "But don't carry it over." "Carry what over?" I asked. The line went silent for a moment before he hung up. One night, I walked into the security office, and the chair was closer to the desk than I remembered leaving it. It hadn't just been moved. It felt adjusted, as if it was waiting for me. I spent the entire night on my feet. The building seemed to hum with a quiet approval. I kept looking through the old logs, and one night I found it. I found my name, already printed in future logs. Weeks ahead, months, years into the future. It was the same handwriting as the rules, same initials next to my name, same resignation date, a few months from now. And then my name appeared again a few weeks after that. Hired, resigned, hired, repeated, over and over into pages I couldn't bring myself to finish reading. That's when I finally understood. The building didn't want a guard, it wanted a witness. It needed a conscious observer to confirm its own existence during its active hours. Our awareness stabilized it, gave its impossible nature a foothold in reality. But too much awareness, too much acknowledgement threatened it. That's why the rules mattered. They were a balancing act. I found the fourth rule, carved lightly into the underside of the wooden desk. I felt it by accident, my fingers tracing the faint grooves. If you feel rested before sunrise, it's too late. I hadn't slept in what felt like days. But that morning, standing in the gray pre-dawn light, I felt calm, clear-headed, incredibly efficient. The worst kind of rested. At 6:30 a.m., on my final walkthrough, the building felt complete, satisfied. The shelves on the third floor were back to their normal spacing. The hallways felt shorter. The hum softened into a gentle, contented sigh. It felt like a creature settling down to sleep after a long, active night. People keep taking this job. The listing never explains the reality. The pay is decent, and for people like me, the quiet feels safe. At first, you don't realize that the building doesn't want silence. It wants your presence. It wants your attention. I've quit, many times. But I always come back. My keycard still works. My name stays on the schedule. The building remembers me. It expects me, and I can't seem to stay away. So if you work nights, and your workplace starts to feel more alert than you are, if you find rules that no one remembers writing, if staying awake starts to feel less like a job and more like participation, be careful. Some places don't close down for the night. They wake up. They just need someone conscious enough to notice. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this, be sure to follow 4 more stories from the quiet hours. Story 4. The apartments across from mine never opened their curtains. I didn't choose the view. The apartment I moved into just happened to face another building. It was identical. Same height, same width, same number of floors. We were so close that if both our windows were open, you could probably hear someone breathing across the gap. At first, I assumed it was temporary housing or maybe offices, something unfinished. But then I realized people lived there. I could see lights turning on and off at night. I could see the vague silhouettes of people moving inside. But there was one thing I never saw. I never saw their curtains open. It wasn't just that the curtains were closed. Lots of people value their privacy. It was that they never, ever moved. Day or night, summer or winter, they stayed perfectly still. There was never a slight shift, never a small gap where someone accidentally pulled them apart or sealed, like they were part of the wall itself. But the lights behind them were always changing. Rooms would brighten and then dim. Sometimes a light would flicker on and off. Felt like something inside was active, alive, maybe even observing. Then I noticed the timing. Every single night, at exactly 11:26 p.m., the lights in the entire building across from me would synchronize. They wouldn't all turn on or all turn off. Instead, they'd adjust, almost like a system calibrating itself. Some rooms would dim, some would brighten, and others would go completely dark. It was so precise, it reminded me of a computer system resetting. The first time I saw it, I checked the clock. Then I checked it every single night after that. It never changed. 11:26 on the dot. It was starting to get under my skin, so I decided to ask my neighbor, Elise. She'd noticed anything strange about the building across from us. She just frowned. "Which one?" she asked. "The one right there," I said, pointing directly at it. She followed my finger and paused for a moment, then just shook her head. "There's nothing there," she said, looking confused. I laughed, thinking she was joking with me, but she didn't crack a smile. She genuinely didn't see it. My next stop was the building manager. I figured he had to know something. He stared out my window for what felt like an uncomfortably long time. "That building isn't part of this complex," he said, his voice measured and careful. "I know," I replied. He looked at me, then back at the window. "You shouldn't focus on it." And that's when a chill went down my spine. He didn't deny it was there, he just told me not to look. That night, I turned off all my lights and sat in the dark, just watching, waiting. At exactly 11:26, the lights across the way did their strange, synchronized dance. But this time, something was different. One room stayed bright, the one directly opposite my own apartment. The curtain didn't move, not even a little bit, but I felt it. I felt its attention on me. It wasn't visual, it was directional, as if something inside had pinpointed my exact position and was now focused entirely on me. Later that night, I was standing in my living room when I caught a flicker of movement out of the corner of my eye. It wasn't inside the other building, it was on my own window, a reflection. My room was pitch black, and I was standing perfectly still. But my reflection raised its hand, moved slowly, as if it was testing something. I instinctively stumbled back from the window. The reflection didn't. It just stayed there, hand raised, watching me. I started having dreams about the other building. Nightmares, really. I'd be in rooms without doors, running down hallways that bent inward on themselves. And the curtains. In the dreams, the curtains would breathe, slowly rising and falling. The scariest part was that I wasn't inside the building in these dreams. I was being aligned with it, measured, positioned. Like a piece of furniture being arranged in a room until it was just right. Then one night, I saw something new. Through the faint glow of the light behind one of the curtains, I could just make out the outline of furniture. A couch, a table, a lamp. It was my furniture. It's placed in the exact same configuration as in my own living room. I couldn't believe it. To test it, I moved my chair to the other side of the room. A few hours later, I looked again. The shadow outline behind the curtain had shifted. It had been corrected to match mine. Then came the sound. There was no open window, no crack, no breeze whatsoever, but I still heard it. It was a low, muffled sound, like fabric brushing against fabric. Like someone was quietly adjusting their curtains from the inside. I only heard it at one time, 11:26. Every single night. That's when I finally understood. The curtains weren't there to hide what was inside. They were there to prevent something from escaping. I knew this because one evening, a single curtain twitched. Just once, the light behind it flared up, suddenly way too bright, then dimmed just as quickly, as if something had leaned too close to the window. Driven by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, I started digging into public records. The building across from mine wasn't zoned for residential use. There were no tenants listed, no owners, no maintenance records, not even a single complaint filed against it. Officially, it didn't exist. And yet there it was, reflecting my life back at me more accurately than my own mirror. Soon, the building started anticipating me. One evening, I walked into my bedroom, but I didn't turn on the light. Across the gap, the light in the corresponding room turned on anyway. I moved to the kitchen, and the room opposite my kitchen brightened. I sat down on my couch, and the light in the building across from me steadied, holding its glow. It was waiting for me. Morning, I noticed Elise's apartment was empty. No moving boxes, no notice, nothing. She was just gone. Curtains, which had always been closed, were wide open. That night, a new light appeared in the building across the gap. It was in the apartment that mirrored hers. That light stayed on. The pattern was becoming terrifyingly clear. The building wasn't random. It was mapping us, was replacing us, one perfectly aligned apartment at a time. The curtain stayed closed because whatever was inside wasn't ready to be seen. It's not until the copy was absolutely complete. I don't remember deciding to do it. It wasn't a conscious choice. I just found myself standing at my window, slowly raising my hand to wave. The moment I did, the curtain in the window across from me pressed outward, bulging as if something was pushing against it from the other side. And behind the fabric, a shape mirrored my gesture perfectly. That was the night my reflection stopped acting on its own, became still again, just a perfect, silent copy of me. I started losing small things. First, I barely noticed. A favorite mug would go missing. A book I was reading would be misplaced. Then my habits started to disappear. Stopped drinking coffee in the morning. I stopped listening to music while I worked. And with each change, the apartment across from me dimmed accordingly, simplifying itself. Whatever was behind those curtains wasn't loud or aggressive. It didn't rush. It just waited, observing, until its imitation became completely indistinguishable from the original. Then it stopped copying, and it started expecting. And then, one curtain finally opened. It's just a few inches. Through the gap, I saw my apartment. It was occupied. But I was standing right here. The thing inside my reflected apartment tilted its head, as if it were studying the one tiny difference between us. The lights didn't just turn on and off. They were syncing. They were aligning their cycles with ours, matching our internal states. That 11:26 calibration, it wasn't a time. It was a checkpoint in the process. I stopped looking. I kept my own lights off. I bought blackout blinds and covered my windows completely. But the building across from me stayed bright. It stayed focused. It was persistent. It didn't need my cooperation anymore. It already had more than enough data. Last night I woke up to moonlight streaming into my room. My new heavy curtains were wide open. I hadn't touched them. I looked across the gap and my blood ran cold. The curtains in the window opposite mine were gone. The window was completely clear, and something was standing inside, in the dark, just waiting. I'm writing this down because if there's a building across from yours that feels too quiet, the curtains never seem to move, if you notice the lights changing whenever you do, stop watching it. Turn away before it finishes learning you. Thank you for listening. Story 5. The bus route that only runs when it's late. I didn't start taking the late bus because I wanted to. I took it because it was the only thing that was reliable. I used to work the evening shift at a huge warehouse on the very edge of the city. By the time I clocked out, pretty much all public transportation had either slowed down for the night or stopped completely. All except for one route. Route 88. It ran every single night. You wouldn't find it on any transit apps, and there were no signs advertising it, but it always showed up, always on time, and it was always empty. Honestly, I was just grateful to have a way home. No matter what night it was, or what was going on in the city, the bus was completely empty when it arrived. No late-night commuters, no one coming home from a bar, not even other exhausted workers like me. It was just the driver. He never spoke to me, never even made eye contact. He wore the same dark uniform every night, a heavy jacket, a cap pulled down low, his hands perfectly steady on the steering wheel. I'd pay my fare, and the machine would accept it without ever showing a balance. Then, the bus would pull away into the quiet streets. I noticed pretty early on that the route map posted inside the bus didn't actually match the city. The street names were close to the real ones, but not quite right. Landmarks I knew were just slightly off. The river seemed to bend the wrong way. Neighborhoods blended into each other in ways that just felt wrong. I figured the map was just really old and didn't think much of it. Not at first, anyway. Then, one night, something strange happened. I checked my phone right when I boarded. It was 11:47 p.m. I settled in and watched the city lights pass by through the window. It felt like at least 10 minutes went by. I pulled out my phone again to check. 11:47 p.m. My phone had a full signal. The battery was fine. The time simply hadn't changed. But the bus kept moving forward, deeper into the night. The bus also made regular stops. Every few blocks it would pull over, The doors would hiss open, and nothing. No one ever got on. No one ever got off. Still, the driver waited patiently at every stop, like he was expecting someone who just never showed up. After a few weeks of this silent routine, my curiosity finally got the better of me. I leaned forward one night and asked, "Does anyone else ever ride this bus?" The driver didn't even turn his head. "Not often," he said. His voice was completely calm, neutral, almost like an automated announcement. I pushed a little further. "Where does this route end?" I asked. He paused for a long moment before answering. "Where it's supposed to." It was a Thursday night when things got really weird. The bus stopped at a corner I'd never seen before. The doors opened and someone actually stepped on. It was a man in a work jacket, breathing hard like he'd been running to catch the bus. He quickly sat down a couple of rows behind me. The bus pulled away. I can't tell you how relieved I felt. Finally, proof I wasn't going crazy, that I wasn't alone on this strange route. Then, the man leaned forward, his voice a nervous whisper. "Do you know what time it is?" I glanced at my phone. "It's 11:47, I told him. The color drained from his face. "Oh," he said, his voice dropping to almost nothing. "I missed it." Just then, the bus pulled to a stop in the middle of a dark street. Doors opened. The driver didn't say a word, just gestured for the man to leave. He didn't argue, just got up and stepped off into the darkness. The doors closed, and the bus continued on its way. After that night, the driver finally spoke to me again without being asked. As I boarded, he said, "If you're going to ride, don't check the time. Why not?" I asked. "Because if you notice you're late," he replied, his voice low. "The route notices too." Over the next week, the city I saw outside the windows began to change. The streetlights grew farther and farther apart. The buildings thinned out, replaced by dark, empty lots. The neighborhoods I thought I recognized started blurring together, losing their distinct features. I could still see parts of the route that felt familiar, but they seemed unfinished, like they were just placeholders. More like fuzzy memories of places, rather than actual solid locations. I realized that Route 88 never turned around. It wasn't a loop. There was no terminal where it stopped, in reverse direction. It only ever moved forward. I started trying to count the stops to make some sense of it, but I gave up after 37. The number didn't matter. The bus wasn't tracking distance. It was tracking something else. It was tracking duration. I started to notice other passengers, though they were rare. When they did get on, they all had something in common. They were tired, but not just physically tired from a long day. It was a deeper existential exhaustion. They'd get on, sit quietly, and just stare ahead. They never spoke. They never checked their phones. Every single one of them, sooner or later, missed their stop. One night, my heart nearly stopped. I saw a street sign outside the window. It had my street name on it. That was impossible. My neighborhood was miles away, nowhere near this part of the city. As I stared, the bus began to slow down. The doors hissed open. For the first time ever, the driver turned and looked directly at me. His eyes were dark under the brim of his cap. "Not yet," he said. The doors closed, and the impossible sign disappeared behind us. That's when I finally began to understand. The bus didn't run on a schedule set by clocks. It followed a different kind of time. It operated in the thresholds, in the space between the end of one day and the start of the next. It ran in the margins where our routines break down, where we lose track of minutes and hours, where being late starts to feel like an inevitable part of who you are. That's when Route 88 becomes available to you. Driven by a mix of fear and a desperate need for answers, I decided to test it. One night, long before my usual stop, I reached up and pulled the stop cord. The bell dinged loudly in the silent bus, but the bus didn't slow down. The driver just gave a slight shake of his head. "Can't choose the stop," he said, his voice flat. "The route chooses you." So, the next night, I did the opposite. I didn't get off at my usual stop. I just stayed in my seat, determined to see where the bus actually ended. The city outside my window dissolved completely. Familiar shapes gave way to dark, unfamiliar structures. The roads narrowed into thin, winding paths. The few remaining streetlights dimmed into faint, hazy glows. The bus itself felt heavier, slower, like it was carrying much more than just me. Eventually, the bus slowed to a final stop. Doors opened, but we weren't on a street. We were inside a vast, cavernous structure. It looked like a depot, with concrete floors and a ceiling so high it was lost in shadow. And there were rows and rows of buses, all identical to mine. All of them were idling, their engines humming in a low, constant drone. And they were all occupied. Passengers sat inside each one, staring straight ahead, perfectly still, perfectly quiet, just waiting. The driver stood up from his seat and turned to face me. "This is where people go," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the huge space, "when they keep being late." My throat was dry. "Late for what?" I managed to ask. "For leaving," he replied. "For changing. For going home." Route 88 wasn't a form of transportation. It was a form of containment. It was a holding pattern for people who had fallen out of alignment with time itself. They weren't dead. They weren't exactly lost. They were just deferred, put on hold indefinitely, and then I saw it. Near the back of the bus, a single seat. It was empty, clean, and seemed to be waiting. I knew, without anyone having to tell me, that the seat was for me. I understood that once I sat in it, I would never leave. I wouldn't age. I wouldn't arrive at any destination. I would just ride forever. I don't know why the route let me go that night. Maybe I hadn't been late for long enough. Maybe it was because I still wanted something, anything, other than just riding. But the bus stopped. Suddenly, and without warning. The doors opened. I looked out, and it was my street. Normal streetlights, normal houses, normal silence. "Don't ride tomorrow," the driver said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a final warning. I stumbled off the bus. The doors closed and it pulled away, disappearing into the night. I'm telling you this now because Route 88 still runs. I see it sometimes, late at night, when the rest of the world is asleep. It's always empty, always waiting. And every now and then, I think I see someone I recognize through the window. Someone from my old job or a face from the neighborhood, still riding, still looking tired, still late. So if you're ever out late and you see a bus that shouldn't be there, if it arrives just when everything else has stopped running, the thought of getting on feels like a relief because you're just too tired to keep going, don't get on. Some routes don't take you home. They just make sure you never arrive anywhere else. Thanks for listening, and if you like scary stories like this, make sure to subscribe.